A 6-year-old girl runs desperately through the soaked streets during a devastating storm, carrying her 8-month-old baby brother in her arms. When she knocks on the first mansion, she finds screaming, "Help! Please, someone help me!" A millionaire opens the door and finds the pair trembling from the cold. With a voice choked by desperation, she pleads, "Uncle, please, my little brother is very sick. I don't have money for a doctor, but he needs help." When he looks at the baby, he is shocked by what he sees. Thunder roared through the mansion like a battle cry, making the leaded glass windows rattle in their gilded frames. Edward Peterson closed the medical textbook he'd been compulsively reading every night for 5 years, still trying to pinpoint where he'd gone wrong in the surgery that had shattered his career. It was 2:15 in the morning when he heard something he would never forget, small fists desperately pounding on his mahogany door. The torrential rain muffled the sounds, but there was an urgency to those knocks that cut through the storm like a blade. Edward hesitated, his hand freezing on the gilded doorknob. In 15 years of living in that estate in the city's most affluent neighborhood, no one had ever appeared at his door during a storm, much less in the dead of night. "Help! Please, someone help me!" The voice was high-pitched, desperate, laden, with an anguish that made his heart involuntarily race. It was a child, a little girl. Edward pulled open the heavy door and found a sight that would be seared into his memory forever. A little girl with dark hair plastered to her face by the rain, wearing a drenched pink coat that offered no protection against the biting cold. In her thin arms, she clutched a baby wrapped in a wet blanket, both trembling uncontrollably. "Uncle, please!" She lifted her face, revealing enormous brown eyes filled with tears that mingled with the rain. "My little brother is very sick. I don't have money for a doctor, but he needs help." The baby was too pale, breathing erratically. Even after 5 years away from medicine, Edward immediately recognized the signs of danger. His dormant medical instincts flared to life like a rekindled flame, making his hands tremble not from the cold, but from the memory of the last patient he couldn't save. "Come in, quickly!" He swung the door wide open, his usual reservations dissolving in the face of the urgent situation. The little girl stumbled inside, leaving puddles on the Italian marble as Edward closed the door against the howling wind. "What are your names?" Edward grabbed soft towels from the hall closet, wrapping the baby first, then the girl. "I'm Sophia, and this is my little brother Michael." She clutched the baby to her chest, as if fearing someone might snatch him from her arms. "He's had a fever for 2 days, but today it got worse, much worse." Edward extended his arms. "May I see him?" Sophia hesitated for a moment that felt like an eternity, studying his face with a disturbing maturity for a 6-year-old. Finally, she handed him the baby, and Edward felt the familiar weight of a life in his hands. Michael was burning with fever. His breathing was shallow, rapid, and his skin had a grayish tint that made Edward's heart race. These were signs he knew all too well, symptoms that had haunted his nightmares for 5 years. "How long has he been like this?" Edward carried the baby to the main living room, where the fireplace crackled, offering warmth and golden light. "It got worse last night." Sophia followed him, her bare feet leaving wet prints. "Before he cried a lot, but now he barely moves." Edward placed Michael on the leather sofa, his experienced hands checking pulse, temperature, breathing. Each gesture rekindled painful memories, but also resurrected knowledge that could never be completely erased. "I need to take him to the hospital immediately." Edward raised his eyes to Sophia, who was watching him with frightening intensity. "No!" The answer came too quickly, laden with a fear that transcended her concern for her brother. "We can't. Go to the hospital. They'll find us." Edward frowned. "Who will find you?" Sophia bit her lower lip, her enormous eyes filling with tears again. The bad men. They said if Mum didn't pay what she owes, they'd take my little brother. Edward's world, so carefully controlled and isolated, began to crumble at that moment. A storm had brought to his door not just two desperate children, but also a dangerous mystery that would test everything he believed about himself. Edward watched Sophia curl up on the sofa, her thin arms hugging her knees as Michael breathed erratically beside her. The girl seemed to carry the weight of the world on her small shoulders, a responsibility too cruel for someone her age. "Sophia, I need to understand what's happening." Edward pulled up an armchair to be at her eye level, his voice soft, contrasting with the urgency he felt. "Where is your mother?" She disappeared 3 weeks ago." Sophia wiped her nose with the back of her hand, letting out a muffled sob. "One day she left for work and never came back. She just left a note telling me to take care of Michael and that if something bad happened, I had to run and never go home." Edward felt a pang in his chest. 3 weeks. A 6-year-old taking care of a baby alone for 3 weeks. "How did you survive all this time?" Mrs. Rodriguez, our neighbor, left her food at our door when she could. Sophia rubbed her swollen eyes. "But then the men started showing up. At first they just asked about Mom, but then they said if she didn't pay the money, they'd take Michael." "Who are these men?" Sophia visibly trembled. Men in black suits with big shiny cars. They knocked on the door every night, shouting that Mom owed a lot of money and that Michael was collateral. Her voice broke on the last word. Edward clenched his fists. The idea of using a baby as collateral for a debt made his anger flare up as it hadn't in years. "Is that why you ran in the storm?" "Yesterday they broke down the door." Sophia hugged her knees tighter. "I grabbed Michael and went out the back window. I ran so fast, but he started getting really hot and I didn't know what else to do." Michael whimpered softly, making both of them look at him with concern. Edward checked his temperature again and didn't like what he felt. The fever was rising, and without proper medication, the baby could go into convulsions. "Sophia, I'm going to give him some medicine to bring down his fever, but we need to be careful." Edward stood up, heading to the first aid cabinet he obsessively kept stocked. "You said they might find you. How?" "They know a lot of people in the city." Sophia watched Edward prepare medications with precise movements. Mrs. Rodriguez said, "They have eyes everywhere, that they know when someone new shows up at hospitals or police stations." Edward paused, the medicine bottle suspended in the air. If Sophia was right, taking Michael to a public hospital would be like handing the children directly to the criminals. But without proper equipment, he was limited to what he could do at home. "Do you trust me?" Edward knelt beside the sofa, holding Sophia's determined gaze. "You let us in when it was raining." Sophia gently touched Michael's face. "And your hands are like the doctors who delivered Michael. Hands that save people." Edward felt a pang in his chest. It had been 5 years since anyone had associated his hands with saving lives. "I'll do everything I can for him, but you need to stay here for a few days. It's safe here." "We can't stay." Sophia shook her head vigorously. "The neighbors will see, they'll talk, and if the men find out where we are, no one will find out." Edward administered the medication to Michael, who didn't react much, worrying him even more. "This house has security, and I won't let anything happen to you." Sophia studied his face for a long moment. "Why do you want to help us? You don't know us." The question hit Edward like a punch. Why was he getting involved? For 5 years, he had chosen isolation, avoiding any situation that could remind him of his failure as a doctor. Now he was offering shelter to 2 children pursued by criminals. Because it's the right thing to do. The answer came out more honestly than he expected. Sophia nodded slowly as if approving his response. "Okay, but if the bad men come, I'll protect you." Edward was surprised by the firmness in his own voice. Outside, the storm was beginning to subside, but inside the mansion, a new storm was just beginning. The first ray of sunlight pierced the mansion's silk curtains, revealing a scene Edward never imagined witnessing in his home. Sophia slept curled on the sofa, a protective arm over Michael, who was finally breathing more peacefully. The medication had worked, at least temporarily. Edward had stayed awake all night, watching the baby, checking his temperature and breathing every 15 minutes. It was like going back in time to his hospital shifts when every life depended on his constant vigilance. The difference was that this time the responsibility felt even greater. Sophia slowly opened her eyes, immediately checking on Michael before looking around, disoriented. For a moment, Edward saw panic in her eyes before she remembered where she was. "Good morning." Edward offered a gentle smile. Michael had a good night. His fever's down. Sophia sat up carefully, touching her brother's forehead. "He's better." The relief in her voice was tangible. "Thank you, Uncle." "Edward," he corrected gently. "You can call me Edward." "Uncle Edward." Sophia smiled for the first time since she arrived, completely transforming her face. Can I give Michael a bath? His diaper's been dirty for a long time." Edward then realized how dirty the children were, their clothes impregnated with the smell of rain and grime. "Of course. I'll show you the bathroom and get some clean towels." Damn! While Sophia took care of Michael in the luxurious bathroom, Edward prepared breakfast, something he hadn't done in years. Usually, his housekeeper arrived at 8 to take care of the house, but today he needed privacy. He called her, cancelling her workday with an excuse about personal issues. "Uncle Edward." Sophia appeared in the kitchen carrying a clean Michael wrapped in a fluffy towel that seemed to swallow him. "He smiled at me. Look." Edward watched Michael, who truly seemed more alert, his dark eyes focusing on faces for the first time since he arrived. "He's recovering well." "Can I help with breakfast?" Sophia placed Michael in a padded chair, improvising supports with pillows. "I know how to do some things. I took care of the house when Mom worked." Edward felt that pang of injustice again. A child shouldn't have to know how to take care of a house or a baby. "You can help me prepare a bottle for Michael. Do you know what kind of formula he drinks?" "The doctor said he can have any baby formula." Sophia climbed onto a stool to reach the counter. "But it has to be warm, not hot." Working together, Edward was surprised by Sophia's competence. She knew exactly how to hold Michael for him to accept the bottle, how to test the milk's temperature, how to burp him afterward. It was a premature and devastating wisdom. "Sophia, do you remember where your mum worked?" Edward asked while she fed Michael. "Lots of places." Sophia didn't lift her eyes from the bottle. "Sometimes she cleaned houses, sometimes she worked in a store, but in the last few weeks she'd go out at night and come back in the morning with money." Edward frowned. "Went out at night?" She said it was better work, that it paid more. Sophia finally looked at him. But she was sad when she came back, and she was scared. She always looked out the window before coming into the house. Edward's phone rang, interrupting the conversation. The caller ID showed the number for Henry Caldwell, his neighbor and president of the Gated Communities Homeowners Association. "Edward, I need to speak with you urgently." Henry's voice sounded tense. "Can I come over now?" "Now's not a good time, Henry. It's about the visitors you had last night. Some neighbors were concerned about strange activity at your house during the storm." Edward's stomach dropped. "What kind of concern?" "Look, you know how it is here in the community. Anything out of the ordinary draws attention. Mrs. Carmen said she saw children entering your house after midnight. That doesn't seem appropriate." "Henry, they were just—" "Edward, I've been your friend for 15 years. If you're in trouble, I can help. But if there are strange children in your house, that could lead to misunderstandings. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Edward looked at Sophia, who was feeding Michael with touching dedication, and felt anger rise in his chest. "I understand. Perfectly. Great. So you'll take care of this today?" "I'll take care of it." Edward hung up the phone with more force than necessary. Sophia had stopped feeding Michael and was watching him with worried eyes. "Do we have to leave?" The question Sophia asked wasn't just about leaving his house. It was about abandoning them to fend for themselves again. "No." Edward was surprised by his own determination. "You're not going anywhere." 2 hours later, Henry Caldwell rang the doorbell insistently. Edward had prepared Sophia and Michael, explaining that they might need to hide in the back room for a few minutes. The girl simply nodded, showing a maturity too advanced for her age about the need to hide. "Edward, my friend." Henry entered with his usual political smile, but his eyes scanned every corner of the room. "How are you? You look tired." "I had a rough night with the storm." Edward crossed his arms, positioning himself strategically to block the view of the hallway where Sophia had taken Michael. "Ah, yes, what a terrible storm." Henry walked to the window, observing the wet garden. "Speaking of which, Mrs. Carmen told me an interesting story about activity here at your house." "Mrs. Carmen should mind her own business," Henry laughed. But the sound lacked humor. "You know how she is, but the thing is, she wasn't the only one who noticed. The community guard also mentioned seeing you entering with company in the middle of the night." Edward felt his blood boil. "Since when do I need permission to have visitors in my own home?" "Calm down, friend. No one's questioning your right." Henry raised his hands in a placating gesture. "But when it comes to unknown children, you understand that could lead to misinterpretations." "What kind of misinterpretations?" "Edward, be realistic. A single man of 45, living alone for years, suddenly bringing children in during the dead of night." Henry left the sentence hanging, loaded with innuendo. Edward's anger exploded. "What exactly are you implying?" "Nothing, nothing." Henry backed away. "I'm just saying appearances can be deceiving, and you have a reputation to uphold here in the community." "My reputation is no one's business." "It is when it affects our community." Henry's mask finally dropped, revealing his true concern. "Edward, this is the most exclusive neighborhood in the city. We can't have situations that draw negative attention." Edward walked to the door, opening it pointedly. "I think you said everything you came to say." "Edward, be sensible." Henry didn't move. "If these children have family, they should go back to them. If they're orphans, there are appropriate institutions. You can't just decide to shelter them without following legal procedures." "And what if I don't want to follow your advice?" Henry sighed dramatically. "Then I'll have to report the situation to the proper authorities. For your own protection, you understand." After Henry left, Edward found Sophia in the hallway, clearly having heard the entire conversation. Her eyes were filled with suppressed tears. "We're going to have to leave?" It wasn't a question, but a resigned statement. "No." Edward knelt down to her level. "I said I'd protect you, and that's what I'm going to do. But the man said he's going to call the police. Then we'll be prepared when that happens." That afternoon, Edward made phone calls he hadn't made in years. First, he called Marina Steele, an attorney specializing in child law whom he had known during his years in medicine. Then he contacted Robert Stone, a discreet private investigator who had previously rendered services to some of his former medical colleagues. "Marina, I need urgent guidance on a case of temporary guardianship for children at risk." "Edward, I thought you'd abandoned anything related to medical or social cases. It's an exceptional situation." Edward looked out the window where Sophia was playing in the garden with Michael, who was already showing more vitality. 2 children appeared at my door during yesterday's storm. Their mother disappeared and they're being pursued by criminals. This is serious, Edward. You need to report this to the authorities immediately. That's precisely what I can't do. If these children enter the official system now, they could end up in the wrong hands. Marina was silent for a moment. Do you have evidence of these threats? I have the testimony of a terrified 6-year-old girl and a baby who almost died from lack of medical care. Edward, legally, you're in a very complicated situation. You could be accused of kidnapping. And if I do nothing, I might have to live with 2 deaths on my conscience. Another silence. What are you getting at? I need time to find out what really happened to these children's mother and neutralize the threat. Can you help me do that legally? I can try to get an emergency temporary guardianship, but it will require a social assessment, documentation. How long would that take? Weeks? Maybe months? Edward looked again at Sophia, who had noticed his gaze and waved shyly. We don't have weeks. So you're asking me to find a way to circumvent the system? I'm asking you to help me save 2 lives. Marina sighed deeply. I'll see what I can do. But Edward, if this goes wrong, you could lose a lot more than your reputation in the community. Edward hung up the phone, knowing he had crossed a line from which he could no longer turn back. Robert Stone arrived at the mansion in the late afternoon, driving a discreet car and wearing clothes that made him look like an ordinary businessman. Edward had known him for 10 years, ever since the investigator had helped him resolve delicate issues involving troublesome patients at the hospital. Edward, you've really gotten yourself into a mess this time. Robert accepted the offer. Coffee, his experienced eyes assessing every detail of the room. 2 unknown children, criminals, hostile neighbors. Sounds like a movie script. I need to know what happened to these children's mother. Edward leaned forward. Sophia said her name was Helen. She worked as a cleaner and then started going out at night for work that paid better. Last name? Sophia doesn't know. They lived in Riverside near the downtown market. Robert jotted it down in a small notebook. Riverside is territory controlled by Marcus Thorne's crew. If the mother got involved with them, the situation is worse than I imagined. Who is Marcus Thorne? A mid-level operator who launders money through a network of shell businesses. Nothing too sophisticated, but he has tentacles in various operations. Robert paused, studying Edward. The question is, why do they want these children specifically? Sophia said they'd use Michael as collateral for their mother's debt. That doesn't make sense. Robert shook his head. They don't risk exposure kidnapping babies for small debts. There's something bigger here. At that moment, Sophia appeared at the living room door, carrying Michael, who had just woken from a nap. Uncle Edward, can I give Michael some water? Of course, sweetheart. Edward stood up, but Robert stopped him with a gesture. Sophia, can I ask you some questions about your mom? Robert used a gentle but professional tone. Sophia looked at Edward, who nodded encouragingly. You can answer. He's a friend and he's trying to find your mom. Okay. Sophia sat on the armchair, adjusting Michael in her lap. But I've already told you everything I know. Let's see. Robert smiled. Did your mom work cleaning houses during the day? Yes, in big houses like this. And at night, she went out for another job. Do you know where? Sophia frowned, concentrating. She said it was in offices, that she cleaned offices at night. But you don't think that's what it was? Sophia bit her lip. Once I heard her talking on the phone. She was crying and told someone she didn't want to do that anymore, that it was too dangerous. Edward and Robert exchanged meaningful glances. Sophia, did your mom ever have visitors at home? Robert continued. No, never. She always said our house was just ours, that no one could come in. Sophia adjusted Michael, who was trying to grab her hair. But in the last few weeks, she kept looking out the window all the time, as if she was expecting something bad. And the men who showed up looking for her, Sophia visibly trembled. They knocked on the door every night. They shouted that she had to pay, that she'd made a mistake trying to quit working for them. Robert stopped writing. Quit working? Yeah, they shouted that no one leaves their work without paying a very expensive penalty. Edward felt a chill down his spine. The story was becoming clearer and more dangerous. Sophia, do you remember anything else your mom said about the work? She always came home with a lot of money, but she was also very sad. Sophia lowered her voice. Once I asked her why she cried so much, and she said that sometimes people do bad things to protect those they love. Robert slowly closed his notebook. Edward, can I speak with you privately? Edward took Sophia and Michael to the kitchen, where she could prepare a bottle while they talked. Their mother was involved in prostitution. Robert got straight to the point. It probably started as cleaning work, but they must have offered better money for other services. And when she wanted to stop, they wouldn't let her. These organizations operate like prisons. When someone tries to leave, they either pay an impossible amount or they become an example for others. Edward ran his hands through his hair. So Helen she could be held against her will. She could have run away and be in hiding, or... Robert didn't finish the sentence. But the children are leverage, as long as they have Michael. And Sophia, she won't go anywhere. And if they find out where they are, Edward, you need to understand something. Robert leaned closer. If Marcus Thorne discovers that a millionaire from the affluent neighborhood is hiding these children, he won't just take them away. He'll use the situation to extort you too. Edward looked into the kitchen, where Sophia hummed softly to Michael while preparing his bottle. Two innocent children had become the center of a dangerous web that could destroy several lives. What do you recommend? Robert sighed. Honestly, that you hand these children over to the official system before it's too late. Edward remembered Sophia's smile that morning, the way Michael had reacted to his medical care, the trust with which she called him Uncle Edward. I can't do that. Then prepare for a war you might not be equipped to win. The next morning, Edward woke to Michael crying in the next room. He had offered the guest bedroom to the children, but Sophia had insisted on sleeping on the sofa to be near the door, just in case she needed to run fast. The girl had taken on the role of guardian with a seriousness that broke Edward's heart. Good morning, Uncle Edward. Sophia appeared in the kitchen carrying Michael, who was reaching, his little arms out towards Edward. He woke up looking for you. I think he's gotten used to you. Edward felt something stir in his chest as he picked Michael up. The baby smiled, showing two tiny budding teeth, and Edward remembered why he had chosen pediatrics so many years ago. How did you sleep? Edward began preparing coffee while holding Michael. Well, Sophia lied with the ease of someone who had learned to protect adults from her worries. Edward had noticed the deep circles under her eyes and the way she startled at every sound. The phone rang. It was Marina, the lawyer. Edward, I have news about the temporary guardianship documentation. Her voice sounded tense. I managed to expedite some processes, but there's a problem. What kind of problem? Someone already filed a report about the disappearance of these children. Yesterday afternoon, Edward felt his blood run cold. Who? A certain Henry Caldwell, alleging suspicion of kidnapping. The authorities will want to talk to you today. Marina, does this mean? It means you need to have all your documentation in order when they arrive. I'm coming over now with the emergency papers. Edward hung up and found Sophia watching him with worried eyes. Are they going to take us away? The question came out in a whisper. I won't let that happen. Edward knelt down to her, level. but we might have to explain our situation to some people today." Sophia nodded, but Edward saw fear growing in her eyes. An hour later, Marina arrived with a folder full of documents. She was a middle-aged woman, graying hair pulled back in a practical bun, glasses perched on her nose, and an expression that blended competence with genuine concern. "Edward, the situation is delicate." She spread papers across the living room table. "I secured a 72-hour emergency temporary guardianship authorization based on imminent risk to the children. Does that mean I can keep them here for 3 days? After that, either we get official documentation of the risk situation or they go to a temporary foster family." Sophia, who was playing with Michael on the rug, looked up. "What's a foster family?" Marina addressed her gently. "They're good people who take care of children when their families can't." "But I can take care of Michael." Sophia hugged her brother. "I always have." "I know, sweetheart. You're very brave." Marina looked at Edward. "But sometimes adults need to help." At that moment, the doorbell rang. Edward looked through the security camera and saw 2 men in suits at the door. "It's them." Marina took a deep breath. "A social worker and a police officer. Edward, let me handle the conversation." The next 30 minutes were tense. The social worker, a tired-looking young man, asked detailed questions about how the children had arrived. The more seasoned officer observed everything with experienced eyes. "Mr. Peterson, do you understand that your situation is irregular?" The social worker consulted his notes. "Even with good intentions, you can't just harbor unaccompanied minors." "I understand. That's why I immediately sought legal guidance." Edward kept his voice calm. "And you, children," the officer addressed Sophia. "How did you get here?" Sophia looked at Edward, who nodded encouragingly. "My little brother was very sick, and it was raining really hard. I knocked on Uncle Edward's door, and he helped us." "Where is your mother?" Sophia lowered her eyes. "She disappeared. Some bad men were looking for her and said they'd take Michael." The officer and the social worker exchanged glances. "What men?" The officer leaned forward. "Men in black suits with big cars." Sophia began to cry silently. "They broke down our door and said Michael was collateral." Marina intervened. "Officer, as you can see, there are clear indications that these children were at risk. Mr. Peterson acted to protect them." The social worker consulted his papers again. "We'll need to verify this story. Where did you live?" "Riverside, near the downtown market." Sophia wiped away her tears. "We know the area." The officer made notes. "There is indeed criminal activity there." After a few more minutes of questions, the officers prepared to leave. "Mr. Peterson, Ms. Steele has shown us the emergency guardianship documentation. For now, the children can stay, but we will investigate the mother's situation." The officer paused at the door. "If we find out there's more to this story than we're being told, I understand perfectly." After they left, Edward sank heavily onto the sofa. Sophia approached him timidly. "Uncle Edward, did I say the right thing?" "You spoke perfectly." Edward put his arm around her. "You were very brave." "Will they find Mom?" Edward looked into Sophia's hopeful eyes and didn't have the courage to express his fears. "Let's hope so." But that afternoon, Robert called with news that would change everything. "Edward, I found Helen." "Where is she?" "At City Hospital. She's been admitted for 4 days in critical condition." "Critical condition?" "Edward, they tried to kill her." Edward arrived at City Hospital, his heart pounding, leaving Sophia and Michael in Marina's care. Robert was waiting for him in the ICU corridor, his grim expression anticipating the bad news to come. "She's conscious, but very fragile." Robert walked beside Edward through the corridors he knew so well. "Edward, There's something you need to know before you see her. What happened to her? Brutal beating, multiple fractures, internal bleeding. Robert stopped at the room's door. But it wasn't random. They wanted information. What kind of information? Robert took a deep breath. Helen discovered something she shouldn't have. Financial documents, money laundering records. She worked cleaning offices at night and saw things that could bring down Marcus Thorne's operation. Edward felt the world spin. She's a witness. More than that, she photographed documents. She has evidence that could dismantle the entire network. Where is this evidence? That's exactly what they want to know, and that's why your children are so valuable to them. Edward entered the room and found Helen Miller, a woman in her 30s who looked 50. Her face was swollen and bruised, her arms in casts, tubes and monitors, connected everywhere. When she saw Edward, her eyes filled with tears. "My children." Her voice came out as a harsh whisper. "Please, tell me they're okay." "They're safe with me." Edward pulled up a chair. "Sophia has taken care of Michael." With incredible courage, Helen closed her eyes, tears streaming down her bruised face. "She's so small to carry such a burden." "Helen, I need to understand what happened. Robert told me you discovered something important." Helen opened her eyes, studying Edward's face. "Who are you? Why are you risking your life for children you don't know?" "I'm a doctor, or I was." Edward hesitated. "They appeared at my door during the storm, and I couldn't just ignore it." "A doctor?" Helen tried to sit up, wincing in pain. "Then you understand about saving lives." "I understand about trying to save, and sometimes failing." Helen studied his expression for a long moment. "I worked cleaning Marcus Thorne's office. I thought he was just a regular businessman. But one night I forgot my bag and went back to get it. And you saw something you shouldn't have. I saw him and other men counting money, a lot of money, piles and piles of bills, and there were documents about shell companies, bank transfers, all spread out on the table." Helen paused, breathing with difficulty. "I photographed everything with my cell phone before I left." "Why didn't you go to the police immediately?" "Because I'm a cleaner from the inner city with 2 small children. Who would believe me against a respected businessman?" Helen coughed, clutching her chest. "I thought about using the photos to protect us, like leverage. But they found out. A week later, he offered me better work. He said I was special, that I could earn a lot more money." Helen closed her eyes again. "I was naive. I thought it was about cleaning other offices." Edward didn't need her to explain the details. He already knew where the story was leading. "When you wanted to stop, they said I knew too much, that I had seen things that could put me in danger if I tried to leave." Helen looked directly at Edward. "But I'm a mother. As scared as I was, I couldn't continue that life. So you tried to escape." "I tried, but they found me. They beat me almost to death, wanting to know where the photos were." Helen held Edward's hand with surprising strength. "I never told them. I preferred to die than hand over what could protect my children." Edward felt a shiver. "Where are the photos?" "On my cell phone, which I hid before they got me." Helen whispered, "Sophia knows where it is." "Sophia knows?" "She's smarter than she looks. Before I left that last night, I told her that if anything happened to me, she should get the cell phone that was hidden under the loose floorboard in her room and seek help from someone important." Edward felt the weight of responsibility fall on him like an avalanche. "Helen, those photos! They could send half the city's elite to prison." Helen squeezed his hand tighter. "Marcus Thorne launders money for very powerful people, politicians, judges, businessmen. If those photos leak, they'll do anything to get them back. and to eliminate anyone who might have seen them. Helen looked directly into his eyes. Including you, now that you know everything. Edward stood up, his head spinning with the implications. He wasn't just protecting 2 children from local criminals. He was at the center of a conspiracy that could shake the city's entire power structure. Helen, do you trust me to protect your children? You've already proven that you do. Helen tried to smile through the pain, but you need to understand, they won't stop. Ever. They have too much to lose. Then we'll have to stop them first. Robert, who had been silent until then, touched Edward's shoulder. Edward, do you understand what you're saying? These people kill for much less. Edward looked at Helen, broken but determined to protect her children, even on the verge of death. He thought of Sophia, humming softly to Michael that morning, carrying responsibilities no child should have to bear. Then let's make sure they have no reason to kill us. Edward headed for the door. We're going to use these photos to protect all the children in this city. When they left the hospital, Edward knew his life had irreversibly changed. He was no longer just offering temporary shelter. He was declaring war on a criminal network that could destroy everything he had built. But for the first time in 5 years, he felt he was doing something that truly mattered. Edward arrived home, his mind buzzing with plans and worries. He found Sophia in the garden, pushing Michael on an improvised swing Marina had set up with pillows and ropes. The domestic scene contrasted drastically with the storm approaching their lives. "Uncle Edward!" Sophia ran to him, but stopped when she saw his tense expression. "Are you sad?" "Not sad, sweetheart. Just worried." Edward knelt down to her level. "Sophia, I need to talk to you about your mom." Sophia's eyes lit up with hope. "You found her?" "I did. She's in the hospital, but she'll be okay." Edward chose his words carefully. "She asked me to give you a very important message." Sophia nodded gravely, once again adopting that disturbing maturity. "Your mom said you know where she hid something very special, a cell phone." Sophia bit her lip, looking around as if checking if anyone was listening. "Mom said it was a secret, that I could only tell if something very bad happened." To her, "Something bad happened, Sophia. That's why we need the cell phone to help her." Sophia studied Edward's face for a long moment, as if weighing whether she could trust him completely. "It's under the loose floorboard in my room, the 3rd board near the window." "In your old house?" "Yes." Sophia lowered her voice. "But the bad men might be there." Edward ran his hand through his hair. "Going to Riverside would be extremely dangerous, but without that evidence, everyone would remain at constant risk." Marina approached, carrying Michael, who had started to whimper. "Edward, can I speak with you?" They moved to the patio where Edward quickly told her about his hospital visit and the revelation about the photographs. "Edward, you're talking about entering territory controlled by criminals to retrieve evidence that could incriminate half the city's elite." Marina automatically rocked Michael. "That's insane. It's the only way to permanently protect these children, or the fastest way to get all of you killed." At that moment, Robert arrived with information that complicated the situation even further. "Edward, we have a bigger problem." Robert looked around, checking for bugs. "Marcus Thorne isn't acting alone in this search. There are unofficial warrants being issued." "What kind of warrants?" "The kind that allows search and seizure without much red tape." Robert showed documents on his tablet. "Someone very powerful is pressuring to have these children found quickly." Marina stopped rocking Michael. "Does this mean that even with the legal documentation they can take the children from here?" "Worse, it means Edward could be arrested for obstruction of justice if he doesn't cooperate." Edward looked at Sophia, who was playing in the garden with a rag doll Marina had brought. The girl was trying to teach the doll how to care for an imaginary baby, mimicking the gestures she made with Michael. "How much time do we have?" Maybe until tomorrow night. Robert put away his tablet. Edward, you need to make a decision. Either you hand the children over now and pray the system protects them, or you go all the way with this. If I hand the children over, what happens to them? Officially, they'll go to a foster family while they investigate the mother's case. Robert paused. Unofficially, someone will make sure they disappear quietly. Edward felt a cold rage build in his chest. And Helen? She probably won't survive the week. Marina looked at Michael, who had fallen asleep in her arms. Edward, there's another option. What? We get the evidence and release everything to the press simultaneously. Protection through full exposure. Robert shook his head. Risky. If they realize what's happening before publication, it's better than waiting to be silently eliminated. Edward made his decision. Robert, do you know any reliable journalists? I know an investigative reporter who isn't intimidated by powerful people. Carla Adams from the Daily Sentinel. Great. Marina, can you take care of the children while Robert and I go get the cell phone? Edward, no. Marina grabbed his arm. If you get caught in that area, they'll kill you before they even ask what you are doing there. Then we'll just have to make sure we don't get caught. That night, Edward did something he hadn't done in years. He prayed. Not for himself, but for Sophia and Michael, two children who had transformed his ordered life into a dangerous chaos, but had also given purpose back to his existence. Sophia appeared at the office door dragging a blanket. Uncle Edward, can I sleep here tonight? Why, sweetheart? Because I'm afraid that when I wake up, this will all be a dream and we'll be alone again. Edward picked her up, feeling the weight of all the trust she placed in him. It's not a dream, Sophia, and I promise you'll never be alone again. Even if the bad men come, especially if they come. Sophia snuggled into his arms. Uncle Edward, Mom always said good people are stronger than bad people. Is that true? Edward looked out the window where the city lights glittered in the darkness. Somewhere out there, powerful men were plotting to silence an entire family. But right there, in his arms, was a brave little girl who had crossed a storm to save her brother. It's true, Sophia, and tomorrow we're going to prove it. But Edward knew that sometimes, for good to prevail, one had to be willing to fight a battle that could cost everything. Dawn arrived grey and menacing, as if the sky itself reflected the tension hanging over the mansion. Edward woke early, finding Sophia already in the kitchen, trying to prepare a bottle for Michael with movements too careful for a 6-year-old. Let me help. Edward took the bottle from her small hands. Did you sleep well? I dreamed about Mom. Sophia picked up Michael when he started to whimper. She was in a white place, like a hospital, and she said she trusted you. Edward felt a pang in his chest. Even in a dream, Helen continued to entrust her children's lives to him. Robert arrived promptly at 8, driving a common car and wearing discreet clothes. Edward, I've mapped out the area. The house where they lived is being watched, but there's a shift change that gives us a 15-minute window. 15 minutes? Edward poured coffee for Robert. Is that enough time? It has to be. After 10 in the morning, activity increases a lot in the neighborhood, and our chance decreases. Marina arrived shortly after, bringing clothes for the children and a worried expression. Edward, I got in touch with Carla Adams. She agreed to meet this afternoon, but she wants assurances that the material is reliable. First, we need to get the material. Sophia approached shyly. Uncle Edward, can I come with you? Absolutely not. The answer came out more abruptly than Edward intended. It's too dangerous. But I'm afraid for you. The confession escaped. Before Edward could stop himself, Sophia smiled in that way that completely transformed her face. "Then I'll stay very close to you." 2 hours later, Edward found himself driving through the narrow streets of Riverside with Sophia in the passenger seat, giving precise instructions about each corner. Robert followed them in another car, keeping a safe distance. "There, Uncle Edward." Sophia pointed to a row of small houses, painted in colors that once were vibrant. The green house with the broken fence. Edward parked 2 blocks away, his heart pounding. The area was too quiet for the time of day, which could either be good luck or a trap. "Sophia, you stay in the car. If something goes wrong, I can run fast." Sophia was already opening the door. "And I know where the friendly neighbors live." They walked casually down the street, Edward pretending to be a relative visiting family. Sophia waved to some people who recognized her, receiving smiles and questions about Michael. "He's doing well, Mrs. Rosa." Sophia replied to an elderly woman hanging laundry on the line. "He's at my uncle's, the doctor." The house where they lived had its front door ripped from its hinges, but the back window through which Sophia had escaped was still intact. Edward was surprised by the girl's ease in climbing walls and moving silently. "This way." Sophia guided him through the back of the house. "My room is that one." The interior of the house showed clear signs of a violent search. Furniture overturned, drawers ripped out, holes in the wall where someone had searched for hiding places. They searched hard. Sophia observed the damage without showing emotion, but they didn't find it. Sophia's room was small, with a single bed and a few toys scattered on the floor. She went directly to a corner near the window, knelt, and began to pry at a floorboard. "Here!" The board came loose easily, revealing a small space where a cell phone was wrapped in plastic. "Mum said it was for emergencies." Edward picked up the cell phone, feeling the weight of the evidence that could save or condemn all of them. "Sophia, you're incredible. I just learned to hide well." Sophia put the floorboard back in place. "Mom always said smart kids survive better." They were leaving through the window when they heard the sound of cars approaching. Edward felt his blood run cold as he recognized the rumble of powerful engines. "Uncle Edward," Sophia clutched his hand. "Easy." Edward pulled her behind a laundry tub. "Let's wait for them to pass." But the cars stopped right in front of the house. Edward heard doors slamming and male voices discussing something in low tones. "Boss said they might come back here." A harsh voice echoed through the yard. "We need to watch better. That girl is smart. If she comes back, it won't be through the front door." Edward and Sophia exchanged glances. They were surrounded. "Uncle Edward," Sophia whispered in his ear, "I know a way." She guided him through a narrow passage between 2 houses, then down an alley that Edward would never have noticed on his own. Every step seemed to echo too loudly. Every breath sounded like a scream. Finally, they reached the street where Robert was waiting, clearly relieved to see them appear. "Did you get it?" Robert barely waited for them to get in the car before accelerating. Edward showed him the cell phone. Sophia knew exactly where it was. On the way back, Edward turned on the device with trembling hands. The screen filled with old notifications, but what mattered was in the photo gallery. Dozens of images showing documents, spreadsheets, bank transfers, names of companies and people Edward recognized from the newspapers. My God. Edward quickly scrolled through the photos. This is enough to take down half the city council. Sophia looked at her mother's cell phone as if it were a bomb. Is this going to protect Mom? It's going to protect your whole family. Edward carefully put away the cell phone. Forever. But when they arrived at the mansion, they found Marina waiting with an expression of complete panic. Edward, they took Michael. Sophia's scream echoed through the mansion like a siren of despair. She ran through the entire house, checking every room, every closet, shouting her brother's name with an anguish that broke Edward's heart. "Michael! Michael!" Her voice quickly grew hoarse. "Where are you?" Marina was sitting on the living room sofa, visibly trembling, tears streaming down her face. "Edward, I swear I was only gone for 5 minutes. 5 minutes to get the clothes off the line." What exactly happened? Edward knelt in front of her, forcing himself to keep his voice calm despite the desperation he felt. Michael was sleeping in the improvised crib in the living room. "Sophia had gone out with you. I was folding laundry in the utility room when I heard a noise." Marina wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "When I came back, he wasn't there anymore." Robert examined the windows and doors. There are no signs of forced entry. They must have come in through the back while Marina was in the utility area. "Are there no security cameras in the back?" Marina asked. "There are, but they were professionally disabled." Robert showed her the cut wiring. "These guys know what they're doing." Sophia stopped running through the house and approached Edward, her enormous eyes filled with tears. "Uncle Edward, they took my little brother." Edward picked her up, feeling her tremble against his chest. "We're going to get him back, I promise." "How?" Sophia pulled back to look into his eyes. "How are we going to find him?" Before Edward could answer, his cell phone rang. Unknown number. "Edward Peterson?" The voice on the other end was calm, educated, but laden with implicit threat. "Who is this?" "Someone who has something you want back." The man paused dramatically. "A very beautiful baby, by the way. Dark eyes, like his sister." Edward felt anger and terror wrestle in his chest. "If you hurt him..." "Relax, doctor, we're not monsters. The baby's well cared for now." "What do you want?" "A simple exchange. You have something that belongs to us. We have someone you value." The voice continued in the same cordial tone. "I think we can reach an agreement." Edward looked at Sophia, who could hear the conversation and was growing paler by the second. "What kind of agreement?" "Helen Miller's cell phone in exchange for the baby. Simple as that." "How do I know you'll give him back?" The man chuckled. "You don't, but you know what happens if you don't make the exchange." Edward clenched his fists. "Where?" "You know the old freight company warehouse in the industrial district, the one that was decommissioned last year?" "I do." "Be there at 8 tonight, alone. Bring the cell phone and nothing else." The voice turned cold. "And doctor, if you or your friends try anything clever, if you call the police, if you do anything other than show up with the cell phone, the baby disappears. Forever." The call ended, leaving Edward staring at the phone in silence. "What did they say?" Sophia asked in a low voice. "They want to make an exchange." Edward knelt to her level. "Your mom's cell phone for Michael." "Then let's give it to them." Sophia clutched his shirt. "Let's give them everything they want." Robert shook his head. "Edward, you know they won't give the baby back. And as soon as they have the cell phone, they'll kill all of you to eliminate witnesses. So what do you suggest? That we make copies of the evidence first, send everything to the journalist before the meeting." Marina stood up, wiping her tears. "We don't have time for that. If they realize the information leaked before the exchange, Michael dies." Edward finished the sentence she couldn't. Sophia tugged at Edward's shirt. "Uncle Edward, what if we're smarter than them?" "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "Mom always said bad people think they're the smartest, but they forget that good people can think too." Sophia wiped tears from her eyes. "You're a doctor. You know things they don't." Edward frowned. "What kind of things?" "Things about making people sleep without hurting them." Sophia looked at him with surprising intensity. "Like when people have surgery." Robert approached. "Edward, is she talking about anesthetics, sedatives, Edward began to understand what Sophia was getting at. If I could sedate the kidnappers, you'd have time to grab Michael and escape, Marina completed his thought, but it would be extremely dangerous. Edward looked at Sophia, and I no longer have access to controlled medications. Sophia ran to her backpack, which was in the corner of the room since she arrived, and returned carrying a small medicine bag. Mom always kept sleeping pills, for when she got really nervous because of work. Edward examined the vials. High-dose diazepam, which Helen probably used to cope with the anxiety of her situation, if administered correctly. Sophia, this could work. Edward took her hand. But it would be very dangerous for all of us. More dangerous than letting them do what they want? Sophia asked with disturbing maturity. Robert considered the developing plan. Edward, even if you manage to sedate some of them, there's still the risk of there being more men than you can handle. Then we'll make sure the police arrive at the right moment. Edward was already formulating a desperate plan. Marina, can you coordinate that? I can try, but Edward, if something goes wrong, if we don't try, Michael dies for sure. Edward looked at Sophia, who watched him with absolute trust. And I can't live with that on my conscience. Sophia hugged him. Uncle Edward, are you going to bring my little brother back? Edward thought of all the surgeries he had performed, all the calculated risks, all the responsibility of having lives in his hands. This time, it wasn't just a patient on the operating table. It was his new family. I'll bring him back. Edward hugged Sophia tight. I promise. But he knew it was a promise that could cost his own life to fulfill. The following hours passed in a blur of frantic preparations. Edward transformed his kitchen into an improvised laboratory, calculating dosages and preparing syringes with a precision he hadn't exercised in 5 years. His hands trembled slightly, not from lack of practice, but from the realization that a single wrong dose could mean Michael's death. Uncle Edward, can I help? Sophia approached the counter where he worked, her eyes fixed on the small vials and syringes. No, sweetheart, this is dangerous. Edward stopped working to look at her. But there's something very important you can do for me. What? Edward knelt to her level. I need you to be very brave and stay here with Marina while I go get Michael. Sophia shook her head vigorously. No, I'm going with you. Sophia, Michael knows me better than anyone. Tears began to form in her eyes. If he's scared, he'll only calm down when he sees me. Edward looked at Marina, who was observing the conversation with a worried expression. Edward, she's right. Marina approached. Babies recognize familiar voices. If Michael is in a panic, Sophia might be the only person who can calm him down. Quickly. I can't put a 6-year-old in an extremely risky situation. You already did. Sophia held his hand. When you took me to get Mom's cell phone, and it worked because we worked together. Robert entered the kitchen at that moment, carrying communication equipment. Edward, I got in touch with a reliable detective. He'll coordinate an operation to reach the warehouse 5 minutes after you. 5 minutes can be an eternity. It's the most I could get without raising suspicion. Robert set up a small transmitter. You'll carry this hidden. As soon as you can locate Michael, give the signal. Edward examined the tiny device. What if they search me? That's why we'll use this. Robert showed him a seemingly ordinary watch. Built-in transmitter, looks like a normal watch, but it has a disguised emergency button. Marina finished preparing a backpack with basic medical supplies. Edward, if Michael is hurt, he'll be fine. Edward didn't allow her to finish the sentence. They need him healthy for the blackmail to work. But even as he spoke, Edward remembered Helen's injuries in the hospital. These men had no qualms about using violence. At 7 in the evening, Edward dressed in dark, practical clothes. He checked the prepared syringes one last time, hidden in the inner pockets of his jacket. Each contained enough sedative to incapacitate. An adult man in less than a minute. Uncle Edward. Sophia appeared beside him, also dressed in dark clothes. "I'm ready." "Sophia, no. If you don't take me, I'll go by myself." The determination in her voice was absolutely serious. "I'll run after your car and get there anyway." Edward looked at the small girl who had become the center of his life in just a few days. Sophia had weathered a storm, carrying a sick baby, had survived alone for weeks, had guided a dangerous mission to retrieve evidence. She was no ordinary child. "All right," Edward sighed, "but you stay in the car until I give the signal, no exceptions, I promise." Robert drove them to the industrial district in silence. The area was deserted at that hour, only empty warehouses and dimly lit streets. The old freight company warehouse stood out against the dark sky, its broken windows looking like empty eyes. "There!" Edward pointed to the building. "Robert, you park 2 blocks away." "Edward?" Robert held his shoulder before he got out of the car. "If something goes wrong, if you can't give the signal in 15 minutes, I'm calling the police." "Anyway." "Understood." Sophia clutched Edward's hand as he prepared to leave. "Uncle Edward, Mom always said that when we're scared, we should think about the people we love." Edward felt something stir in his chest. "And who do you think about, Sophia?" "Michael, Mom, and you." She smiled through her tears. "Because now you're family too." Edward hugged her tight, feeling the weight of all the responsibility he had taken on. "You're my family too, Sophia. And families protect each other." "Always?" "Always." Edward walked alone through the dark streets towards the warehouse, each step echoing in the silent night. His hands were steady now, his mind focused, like in the old days when he entered a complicated surgery. The difference was that this time, he wasn't fighting a disease or injury. He was fighting men who wouldn't hesitate to kill to protect their secrets. When he reached the warehouse door, Edward took a deep breath. Inside was Michael, scared and vulnerable. And perhaps it was their last chance to all get out of this alive. Edward pushed the heavy door open and stepped into the darkness, carrying with him all the hope of a family that had learned to trust him completely. The sound of the door closing behind him echoed like a gunshot in the silent night. The darkness inside the warehouse was almost total, broken only by a few faint emergency lights that cast menacing shadows among the old, abandoned machinery. Edward walked cautiously, his steps echoing in the empty space, until he heard a familiar voice coming from the depths of the warehouse. Michael's crying. "Punctual as a good doctor." A voice emerged from the darkness, followed by the sound of approaching footsteps. Dr. Edward Peterson, I presume. 3 men emerged from the shadows. The leader was a middle-aged man with graying hair, wearing an expensive suit that contrasted with the industrial setting. Edward recognized the type, the respectable face of dirty operations. "Marcus Thorne." Edward didn't ask a question. "I see you did your homework." Marcus smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "Where's the cell phone?" Edward pulled the device from his pocket, but kept his distance. "First, I want to see Michael." Marcus gestured, and one of the henchmen brought a baby carrier where Michael was strapped in, crying desperately. The baby was visibly frightened, but apparently unharmed. As promised, intact. Marcus took a step closer. "Now the cell phone. First, let me calm him down." Edward took a step towards Michael. "He's in a panic. The baby's fine. The cell phone, doctor." Edward pulled a syringe from the inner pocket of his jacket, as if reaching for the cell phone. "Again. Actually, I have something better than the cell phone." "What?" "A proposition." Edward kept the syringe hidden. "You know that merely destroying the cell phone won't solve your problem. Helen is alive in the hospital. She can testify about everything she saw." Marcus frowned. "Helen Miller won't testify about anything." "Because you plan to kill her." Because she's already been transferred to a private facility where she'll be very well cared for until she recovers her memory. Marcus smiled coldly. Traffic accidents can cause permanent amnesia. Edward felt rage explode in his chest. You're a monster. I'm a businessman who protects his investments. Marcus held out his hand. The cell phone, now. Edward stepped closer, pretending to hand over the device, but at the last second he plunged the syringe into Marcus's neck. The man staggered, looking at Edward in disbelief. What did you... Marcus collapsed before finishing the sentence. The two henchmen quickly approached, drawing weapons, but Edward was already moving. 5 years away from medicine hadn't dulled his emergency reflexes. The second syringe found the first henchman's arm, who fired a shot that ricocheted off the metal walls. The third man hesitated for a crucial second, just enough time for Edward to hide behind an old machine. You idiot! The last henchman yelled at his collapsing colleague. You just had to grab the phone. Edward moved silently between the machines, approaching. Michael, who was crying louder and louder. The baby recognized him and stretched out his little arms, further increasing Edward's desperation to get him out of there. The remaining henchman was nervous, firing randomly into the shadows. Come. Out, doctor. There's nowhere to run. Edward reached Michael and began to unbuckle the car seat when he heard footsteps approaching. There wasn't time to free the baby silently. That's when he heard a small but determined voice coming from the warehouse entrance. Hey, ugly uncle! Sophia had entered the warehouse against all orders. The henchman turned towards the voice, giving Edward his back for a few precious seconds. Edward plunged the last syringe into the man's back, who turned to shoot, but was already losing consciousness. The shot went wild, hitting the ceiling, and the henchman collapsed. Sophia, Edward yelled, finally freeing Michael. I told you to stay in the car! Sorry, Uncle Edward! Sophia ran towards them. But you were taking too long and I heard shots! Edward picked Michael up, feeling relief flood his body as the baby stopped crying and nestled against his chest. Sophia, you could have been killed, but I wasn't. Sophia smiled, gently touching her brother's face. And now we're all together again. Edward activated the emergency signal on the watch, and in less than 2 minutes, the sound of sirens approached. Marcus and his henchmen were still unconscious when the police stormed the warehouse. Dr. Peterson, the detective Robert had mentioned, approached. Detective Costa, are you all right? We're all fine. Edward still held Michael, who was playing with the buttons on his jacket as if nothing had happened. The men will wake up in a few hours with a headache but no permanent damage. And the evidence? Edward handed over Helen's cell phone. Everything you need is here. Sophia tugged at Edward's shirt. Uncle Edward, can we go see Mom now? Edward looked at the brave little girl who had risked her life to help him save her brother, and felt his heart fill with a love he didn't know he was still capable of feeling. Yes, sweetheart, now we can go home. As they left the warehouse, Michael fell asleep in Edward's arms, and Sophia held his free hand with absolute trust. They had won the battle, but Edward knew that the real victory would be to rebuild a family that had been almost destroyed by greed and violence. The storm had passed, and finally they could see the dawn. 3 days after the confrontation at the warehouse, Edward entered City Hospital carrying Michael and holding Sophia's hand. The baby had fully recovered from the trauma of the kidnapping and now smiled at anyone he encountered. Sophia, in turn, kept talking about how brave they had been and how they would soon all be together again. Helen was awake when they entered the room, looking much better than during the last visit. The marks of violence were still visible, but her eyes shone with joy at seeing her children. My babies! Helen stretched out her arms, ignoring the pain. Sophia ran to her mother, while Edward slowly approached with Michael. Mommy, Mommy! Uncle Edward saved us! Sophia spoke quickly, trying to tell everything at once. And Michael got strong again, and we live in a big house, and I learned to make bottles." Helen laughed through her tears, kissing her daughter's face repeatedly. "You've grown so much in such a short time, my princess." Edward placed Michael in Helen's arms, observing the reunion with a smile he couldn't suppress. The baby immediately recognized his mother, grabbing her hair and babbling in his own special language. "Edward," Helen looked at him with tears in her eyes. "How can I thank you for everything you've done for us? Seeing you all together again is thanks enough." Edward pulled up a chair. "Helen, there are some things I need to tell you." In the following minutes, Edward explained about the investigation, the arrest of Marcus Thorne and his accomplices, and especially how the photographs she had taken were helping to dismantle a corruption network that extended far beyond what they had imagined. Carla Adams, the journalist, published the first report yesterday. Edward showed her the newspaper on his cell phone. There are already 3 calls for impeachment, 5 businessmen arrested, and the IRS has opened 16 investigations. Helen held the cell phone with trembling hands. "My God, I just wanted to protect my children, and you ended up protecting hundreds of other families." Edward gently touched her shoulder. "Helen, you are a hero. The hero is the one who saved my children when I couldn't." Helen looked directly into his eyes. "Edward, I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Actually, there's something I want to propose." Edward took a deep breath. "When you recover, I'd like you and the children to continue living with me." Sophia stopped playing with Michael and looked at Edward with enormous eyes. "Forever, Uncle Edward, if your mom agrees." Edward looked at Helen. "I know it sounds strange, but these weeks with Sophia and Michael have taught me something I had forgotten. What it means to have a family." Helen studied his face for a long moment. "Edward, you don't owe us anything. You've already done more than—" "It's not about owing." Edward leaned forward. "It's about wanting. I want to see Michael take his first steps. I want to teach Sophia to ride a bike. I want to be a part of your lives if you'll let me." Sophia jumped off her mother's bed and ran to hug Edward. "I want to, Uncle Edward, I really do." Helen smiled, wiping her tears. "Sophia, let Mommy talk to Uncle Edward." "Actually, there's one more thing." Edward hesitated. "I'm returning to medicine. I'm going to open a free pediatric clinic on my property for families who can't afford private treatment." "Why?" "Because you reminded me why I became a doctor, to help those in need." Edward looked at Michael, who was playing with the buttons on his shirt. "And because there are many children like Sophia and Michael who need care." Marina appeared at the door at that moment, carrying flowers and a radiant smile. "Sorry to interrupt, but I brought good news." "What news?" Edward stood up. "The adoption documentation has been approved." Marina showed him the official papers. "Edward, officially you are Sophia and Michael's legal guardian until Helen fully recovers." Sophia clapped her hands. "Does that mean we're a real family now?" Helen pulled her daughter close. "Sophia, what do you think? Do you want Uncle Edward to be part of our family?" "He already is." Sophia looked at Edward as if the question were obvious. "He protected us, took care of us, and taught me that good people are stronger than bad people." Edward felt tears burn his eyes. 5 years ago, he had lost a patient and thought he could never save another life. Now, looking at the family that had become his, he realized that sometimes saving lives has nothing to do with medicine. "Helen, I know it's happening very fast, but—" Edward held Sophia's hand. "Would you let me officially adopt the children? Not to take them from you, but to ensure they always have legal protection. And that we're family forever," Sophia completed. Helen looked at her children, then at Edward. "Are you sure? It's a huge responsibility." "Absolutely sure." Edward smiled. "In fact, I've never been so sure of anything in my life." Helen extended her hand to him. "Then welcome to the family, Edward." Sophia cheered and hugged everyone simultaneously, while Michael clapped his little hands without fully understanding what was happening, but clearly sensing the happiness around him. Outside the hospital, the sun shone brightly, as if even the weather wanted to celebrate the birth of a new family. A family that had been forged not by blood, but by courage, love, and the determination to protect each other against any storm. Edward knew there would still be challenges ahead, but he also knew that now he wouldn't face anything alone. He had Sophia with her unwavering courage. He had Michael with his smiles that brightened any difficult day. And he had Helen, a woman who had risked everything to protect her children. Finally, he had a real family. 6 months later, Edward woke to the familiar sound of laughter coming from the garden. Through the bedroom window, he saw Sophia teaching Michael to take his first hesitant steps on the soft grass, while Helen watched them from a rocking chair, completely recovered and radiant with happiness. The mansion had transformed completely. What was once a cold, isolated space now brimmed with life. Toys scattered across the living room, Sophia's drawings taped to the refrigerator, the constant sound of a family intensely living every moment together. "Good morning, Daddy Edward." Sophia ran into the house when she saw him in the kitchen, using for the first time the title they had decided on together. The official adoption had been finalized the previous week, in a simple but touching ceremony. "Good morning, Princess." Edward picked her up, spinning her in the air until she giggled. "How's Michael's training going?" "He can already take 3 steps by himself," Sophia announced proudly. "Mommy says he'll be running all over the house soon." Helen entered carrying Michael, who immediately stretched out his little arms to Edward. The baby had grown remarkably, not only physically, but in confidence and joy. His eyes shone with the security of a child who knew he was protected and loved. "Good morning, love." Helen kissed Edward gently, a gesture that still surprised him. With its natural tenderness, their relationship had slowly blossomed, built on solid foundations of mutual respect and shared love for the children. "How are the preparations for the grand opening?" Helen served coffee as Edward settled Michael into his special high chair. "All set," Edward smiled, looking out the window at the annex that had been built at the back of the property. "The Hope Family Clinic officially opens on Monday." Sophia clapped her hands. "And I'm going to help Daddy Edward and take care of the sick kids." "You certainly are." Edward affectionately ruffled her hair. "You'll be my official assistant." The free pediatric clinic had been the life project Edward didn't know he needed. Using part of his fortune and all his medical expertise, he had created a space where vulnerable families could receive quality medical care at no cost. Robert appeared at the back door, now an official employee of the clinic, as the security and social outreach coordinator. "Edward, 10 more applications came in today. We're going to have a waiting list for months. Then we'll hire more pediatricians." Edward didn't hesitate. "No child will go without care due to lack of resources." Helen approached, resting her hand on his shoulder. "Are you sure we can afford all this?" "Helen, I've discovered that money sitting in the bank doesn't bring anyone happiness." Edward covered her hand with his. "But money used to help families like ours. That's worth more than any investment." Marina arrived for lunch, as she did every Sunday since becoming an official part of their extended family. She had taken on the role of legal counsel for the clinic, ensuring that all families receiving care also had legal support when needed. "I brought the latest news about the Thorne case." Marina spread newspapers across the table. 3 more politicians have resigned, and the investigation has expanded to other states. "And Helen?" Edward asked. "Officially, she's been recognized as a protected witness and civic hero." Marina smiled at Helen. There's a proposal to name her as a consultant for a women's vulnerability and protection program. Helen blushed slightly. I still can't believe. Those photographs caused all this. You saved many more lives than you imagine. Edward held her hand. How many women won't go through what you went through because you had the courage to document the truth? After lunch, the whole family gathered. In the garden, Sophia played doctor with her dolls, mimicking the gestures she saw Edward make at the clinic. Michael crawled on the grass, fascinated by every leaf and flower he found. Helen read a book on child psychology, preparing for her new work. Edward, Helen approached him, who was watching the children play. Do you regret it? Changing your life completely because of us? Edward pulled her into his arms, looking at the scene before him. Sophia was teaching Michael to listen to a teddy bear's heart, patiently explaining how to be gentle with scared patients. Helen, 6 months ago I lived in an empty mansion, reading medical books I didn't practice, avoiding any emotional responsibility. Edward gently kissed her forehead. Today, I have a daughter who teaches me courage every day, a son who reminds me of the pure joy of living, and a partner who shows me what true love is. And don't forget the clinic, Sophia shouted from where she was, always attentive to adult conversations. Daddy Edward is going to save many kids. That's right. Edward chuckled. And I can't forget that I'm going to have the best assistant in the world. Forever? Sophia asked, running to hug them. Forever. Edward replied, embracing his complete family. That night, when the children were asleep, Edward and Helen sat on the patio, watching the stars shine brightly in the clear sky. You know what's funny? Helen rested her head on his shoulder. What? That stormy night, when Sophia knocked on your door, I thought I had lost everything. My children were in danger. I was injured. There was no hope. And now? Helen smiled, looking at the house where her children slept safely. Now I know that sometimes we lose everything to find something much better. Edward hugged her tighter. The storm brought you to me, and you gave us a home. We built a home together. In the children's room, Sophia whispered a prayer she had learned from Helen, thanking for Daddy Edward, for Mommy, for her little brother, and asking for protection for all families who needed help. Michael slept deeply, holding the teddy bear Edward had given him, a small smile curving his lips in his sleep. The mansion that once housed only solitude now exuded love in every room. And on Monday, its doors would open again, not to a desperate family fleeing a storm, but to dozens of families who would find care, protection, and hope. Edward had learned that true wealth was not in bank accounts or properties, but in the courage to open one's heart to those who knock on our door, asking for help. Sophia had taught him that children can be incredibly strong when they fight for love. Helen had shown him that second chances can be even more beautiful than first opportunities. And Michael, with his innocent smiles and constantly outstretched arms, reminded him daily that the future is built with hope, one day at a time. The storm had long passed, but its fruits would continue to flourish for generations. In the Hope Family Clinic, in the love of a family who chose each other, and in the certainty that when good people unite, they can transform not only their own lives, but the entire world around them.